All right, we're back out here in the garage. I've got a little bit more than just a progress update for you this time. We're gonna talk about everything that's involved in swapping this truck to a T5 from the M5OD because I finally got all of the parts and it looks like I'm pretty much gonna be able to wrap this up in the next week or so. So I thought I'd walk you guys through it step by step. Although I've been kind of following along with this one on TikTok, having it all in one place seemed like a good idea. So hopefully you guys enjoy. So step one, I've got to get the transmission. I've got the T5 just kind of sitting in here on a jack and bolted to the engine. I've got to get it back out so that I can actually get the clutch and flywheel in, which have finally arrived. And I just got the mid plate yesterday as well. Okay, so now that this transmission's out on the ground, we can kind of go through the differences here between this and the M5R2 or M5OD-R2, whatever you want to call it. First off, you can see how far forward the shifter is on this. If you know Mustang T5s, you'll know that this isn't actually what they look like. The tail housing normally has the shifter back here, like you can see on this one. So I've put a tail housing off of an S10 onto this. All you need to do is find the same year S10 T5 as the Fox Body T5, swap this top plate over, and this here, I did get an aftermarket shifter as well to shorten throws, as well as get some stops so that we don't bend shift forks. But the overall length is essentially the same. The spline count and OD on the back are the same, so the same slip yoke should work, and the same spacing on the front as well. So other than the shifter, it's basically a direct bolt-in kind of deal. Other than, this uses a 157 tooth flywheel and bell housing, so I did have to get a new clutch for it as well. So I've got a 157 tooth flywheel, Ford Racing clutch, and this was the old stock style. It's an 11-inch clutch instead of 10.5, and it's also a 164 tooth flywheel. We did also have to do some slight modifying to the transmission crossmember. You can see the factory mounting point is here. The S10 T5 mounting point is a little further forward, so we had to make a little thing here. Now, another thing we had to deal with, the throwout bearing on the M5R2 and in these trucks in general is a hydraulic style, whereas factory on the Fox Body style is cable driven. So we're building an adapter plate for this master cylinder so that we can run this Willwood aftermarket one, because the factory one has this chintzy plastic line that I can't adapt to the aftermarket throwout bearing I'm gonna have to go to. And these don't really have a great provision to bleed them properly either, which is part of the problem I'm having. This is the kit we'll be using to adapt the T5 to a hydraulic throwout bearing. I was going to use the kind that just uses a linear slave cylinder on the outside and uses the stock clutch fork. But this style is a lot, cleaner of an install. And you basically just stack shims underneath that to get the right depth, which is what we're gonna have to do in a minute here. But before we get too far into that, I'm gonna have to get this flywheel and clutch in as well as the bell housing so I can measure the depth from the face of the bell housing to the clutch so that I know how many shims to put in on the throwout bearing. Okay, today is tomorrow. I finally got the right bolts for the flywheel. Turns out they're metric on the smaller flywheels. It might just be because this one was Chinese, but whatever. I've got the right bolts, so let's get this thing back in the truck. While I was out, I did get some more parts for the master cylinder. I've got a rod end with a coupling nut so that that's the right length for what I need. And we did finally get this hose. So this is a some type of brake line fitting to a -3, which is what's on the throwout bearing. To make this work, because it's a little bit different bolt pattern than the stock master cylinder, we're gonna build a plate. So we're gonna have, these are gonna be the factory mounting locations on the firewall. You can see the studs here. And then we're gonna drill a hole lower that locates this. And then these will be the two holes that this needs to mount into the plate. The bottom one will be attached with the stock stud. This one will probably weld a stud to the plate from the back. Okay, we got that all buttoned up. You can see the bottom one, we're using the stock stud. The top one, there was actually enough space in there that I just have a bolt holding that in. I didn't have to weld anything. But yeah, that plate, once it's painted up, you won't even know this isn't factory. And then super straightforward under the dash, you can see we've just got a rod end bolted to the stock clutch arm, if it's gonna focus. And you get the full stroke out of it, so we're good there, with some adjustment if needed. Okay, time to get the flywheel on, and then we can throw the clutch on, put the bell housing on, and get a measurement. Okay, flywheel's in. Just getting some fresh air while the brake clean flashes off from cleaning the flywheel, and we'll get the clutch on here. Okay, so now what we gotta do, I've actually never done this before, so fair warning, I'm learning as we go, but we gotta take a straight edge, put it here, and then we're gonna have to measure to the fingers on the clutch fork, and that will be our measurement that we're gonna have to get close to with the transmission, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, so we're looking at 5.46 inches. I'm going to measure in a couple different spots just to make sure that's about right, and then we'll go do the transmission. Okay, so we're going to do the same type of measurement up here. Basically what we're looking for is the distance between this face, which is what we measured against, and this bearing. Since we added this on like this distance here on the other measurement, it doesn't matter that this is going to add because we're adding the same amount on each one. We're just going to go like that. Check a measurement, and we're looking at 5.325, something like that. So that difference there, we've got 5.325 or 350, some in and around there. It doesn't have to be exact because the distance we're looking for is somewhere between 100 and 150 thousandths clearance. And we've got that by the look of it because we were 5.450 and 5.325, we're good. Now to get that measurement, and I read this online as well, I had to use every single shim here to shim it. You've also got to remember that if you've used it before, this will be partially expanded. You need to make sure all of the fluid is pushed out and it's completely bottomed out here, otherwise you won't get an accurate measurement. So from here, all there really is left to do is bleed the master cylinder, basically by pumping the clutch a whole bunch of times with this line feeding back in. I've got a little bleeder valve that came with the throwout bearing kit, so that makes it a little bit easier, although my phone doesn't want to focus on it. Once that's bled, it needs to be routed down here. I'll probably run it with the fuel lines to our throwout bearing, and it uses the lower port. You want the bleeder line for the throwout bearing on the higher port so that it gets more air. Once that's attached, we'll throw the transmission in. It's going to be a bit of a process getting everything all lined up at the same time. But once you've done that, bolted everything in, then you just bleed it from this line here, tuck that out of the way. Then we really just need to throw the cross member back in. Actually, I'd probably put the cross member in before I bled the clutch, or bled the throwout bearing anyway. I'll bleed the master cylinder beforehand. And then we just bolt the drive shaft in. I figured out the last time I broke this transmission, I've actually very, very slightly twisted the splines on the inside of the slip yoke because it will only go to about here in the transmission and bottoms out, which happens to be right where it was riding when I broke the transmission. But it should be able to slide in the entire way. Like this one is the same yoke, just smaller, smaller U-joint, and it will bottom out completely in this transmission. There's one of those in stock in the city though, so I'll go get it tomorrow. And then it's basically done. So we'll see how it lives in the next video probably. Actually, might not be the next video for sure, because it's still winter here in Canada, but very soon we'll get this out on the road and see how it holds up. Because everyone's telling me the T5 is just going to explode as soon as I have it out on the road. But if you think about it, you know, the heaviest Fox bodies would have been maybe 3,700 pounds. This truck is actually about 3,700 pounds, believe it or not. So would you be worried about breaking a T5 if you were in a Mustang convertible? Probably not. So this is probably fine as well. As always, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.